Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be going over my full first-round draft strategy for 2023 fantasy football drafts. We're going to be talking about the consensus ADP in the first round from ESPN, Sleeper, NFL, and RT Sports, all averaged together. I'm going to be talking about how I like each player based upon where they're ranked in consensus ADP, and then at the end of the video, I'm going to be talking about my top 12 overall rankings, how I would pick at every single spot from pick 1 through 12 if I was controlling every team in a fantasy football draft. But before we could get into things, if you do end up enjoying today's video, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. If you are new, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure you leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. Follow me on Twitter or X at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into my first round draft strategy for 2023 fantasy football drafts. We begin with the consensus number 1 overall pick, and that is Justin Jefferson, wide receiver of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I know over the last couple of years, and basically over the last decade, every single year, the unanimous number 1 overall pick in fantasy football drafts was a running back. It was going to be running back number 1 overall, and it might be running back for the first 5 or 6 picks in a row. But this year, it really does feel like the pendulum has shifted towards wide receivers going much earlier on in fantasy drafts, and in a majority of drafts that I've done thus far, a wide receiver has went number 1 overall, and most of the time, that wide receiver is Justin Jefferson. Jefferson finished last year as the wide receiver number 1 in PPR and the wide receiver 2 in PPR points per game. He played in all 17 games last season with the Vikings, having 184 targets, 10.8 per game, number 1 at wide receiver, 128 receptions, 7.5 per game, also number 1, 1,809 receiving yards, 106.4 per game. You guessed it, number 1 at wide receiver. The only category in which he wasn't number 1 was total touchdowns with 9, where he ranked 4th. He was 8th in yards per target, 3rd in yards per team pass attempt, and 1st in total route wins at the wide receiver position. The reason why I like Justin Jefferson so much and why the community at large likes Justin Jefferson a bunch is because this is an offense that is going to be throwing the ball at an incredibly high rate. Their defense is bottom of the barrel dog shit, and I really do believe that this offense for the second year in a row under Kevin O'Connell will be incredibly pass heavy, and that gives Justin Jefferson the upside of getting the most targets, which could lead to the most receptions, the most receiving yards, and the most receiving touchdowns in the National Football League. Justin Jefferson is an incredibly safe number 1 overall pick because of that fact, because this is an offense that is going to be throwing the ball at such a high rate, and Justin Jefferson is, in my opinion, one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League. Sure, you could make the argument that Kupp is better than him, or Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, but that list is not incredibly long. I know some people will be a little bit worried about drafting Justin Jefferson number 1 overall because Kirk Cousins isn't the best quarterback on earth, right? Justin Jefferson last year puts up all these great numbers with the 35th most target accuracy passes thrown his way, 7.5 target accuracy for Justin Jefferson, 35th at wide receiver, and still was the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football. Doesn't take a rocket scientist, a mad scientist, Dexter in his laboratory to figure out that Justin Jefferson should be a unanimous top 3 fantasy football draft pick this year, and I would personally take Justin Jefferson at the 1.01 number 1 overall. At number 2, we have a guy that some may consider the true number 1 overall pick, the heir to the throne, Christian McCaffrey, running back of the San Francisco 49ers, running back 2 in PPR last year and the running back 2 in PPR points per game. He played in all 17 games last season with 16 starts. The one game in which he didn't start was the game when he was coming from the Carolina Panthers to the 49ers. He did play in that game, but he didn't get a super high workload because he just showed up like days before the fucking game kicked off. 17 games played, like I said, with 16 starts, 244 carries, 9th at running back, 1,139 rushing yards, 7th, but where the money is made, the money maker for Christian McCaffrey in fantasy football is the receiving volume. 107 targets, 6.3 per game, number 2 at running back. 85 targets, 5 per game, number 2 at running back. 741 receiving yards, 43.6 per game, number 1, and 13 total touchdowns, number 3 at running back. Christian McCaffrey is in the perfect situation to succeed in San Francisco. They have the best head coach for a run game genius, Albert Einstein of the run game in Kyle Shanahan. They have an offensive line that is incredibly solid, and they have a team that knows that Christian McCaffrey is one of the biggest focal points in this offense. McCaffrey ranked 8th in yards per touch last season, 6th in breakaway runs, and 4th in yards created. Now, he did rank 27th in true yards per carry, but something that is very true when it comes to running backs is if you're going to be seeing 12, 13, 14, so 14.4 carries per game for McCaffrey. If you're seeing a lot of work like that, you don't necessarily need to average 5 true yards per carry a game to be successful. But some of those running backs who aren't seeing as many touches, if they're not averaging close to that, then their fantasy football value obviously is going to plummet. So the fact that he's 27th in true yards per carry doesn't scare me one bit. I truly believe strongly in this 49ers offense, and I believe very strongly in the safety that Christian McCaffrey brings. I know last season a lot of people were kind of afraid to draft Christian McCaffrey, right? But if you faded him last year, you would have felt like a bit of an idiot because of how great he was both in Carolina as well as in San Francisco. Moving to number 3 in the consensus ADP, we have Ja'Marr Chase, wide receiver of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, I personally have Ja'Marr Chase ranked one spot ahead of Christian McCaffrey. We're going to be talking about my actual top 12 overall rankings at the end of the video. But again, it's like grasping at straws in an argument here between Ja'Marr Chase and Christian McCaffrey. If you have McCaffrey ranked even number 1 overall, I wouldn't find that to be all that crazy. So Ja'Marr Chase of the Bengals, it is important to note that we still don't know the 100% severity of the injury to Joe Burrow. If Joe Burrow is good to go a couple of weeks from now when you're doing your fantasy football draft and you feel very confident that Burrow is going to play week 1 and be close to 100%, then I am leaving Ja'Marr Chase as a top 3 fantasy football draft pick. But I want to make it known that if Joe Burrow doesn't look fully healthy coming towards week 1, I am going to be scared of Ja'Marr Chase. Now, he's not going to plummet outside of the first round. He's not going to fall out of the first round. Nothing crazy. But I would definitely move him a couple of slots back if Joe Burrow's health wasn't close to 100%. Because if something happens to Joe Burrow and he misses a serious amount of games, or maybe he just starts off the season missing 3-4 games, those are 3 or 4 games where the production of Ja'Marr Chase would be significantly different. Now, maybe he could still get the targets, but the offense isn't going to be able to move the ball as well. They're not going to score as many touchdowns, and that would obviously clearly hurt Ja'Marr Chase's value. One of the best things about Ja'Marr Chase is the fact that he is one of the best quarterbacks throwing him the ball. He was the wide receiver 11 in PPR last year, but that was because he only played in 12 games. He ranked as the wide receiver 3 in PPR points per game. He had 134 targets, 11.2 per game, ranking 14th, 87 receptions, 7.3 per game, ranking 12th, 1,046 receiving yards, 87.2 per game, ranking 16th, and 9 total touchdowns, 4th at wide receiver. I believe Ja'Marr Chase has the upside to smack the NFL up like Jose Ramirez slapped up Tim Anderson in that baseball game a couple of days ago. I really do think Ja'Marr Chase has the upside to be the number 1 receiver, to eclipse potentially 2,000 receiving yards. And that is why I say early on in the first round, you are really grasping at straws when you are making an argument for one guy over the other. It wouldn't shock me one bit if Ja'Marr was the best receiver and the best fantasy football player overall. So there's going to be people that have Ja'Marr Chase ranked number 1, which I think is a little crazy right now because of the Joe Burrow health. But if we knew Joe Burrow was 100% healthy, obviously if Ja'Marr Chase is ranked as the number 1 receiver, I would not bat an eye, or the number 1 overall pick even. Moving now to the 4th overall player based upon consensus ADP, we got Austin Ekeler, running back of the LA Chargers. Now, I have Austin Ekeler ranked 1 spot below this, but again, it is definitely close for me. I know a lot of people feel an intense amount of safety. They feel like they're wrapped in their fucking blanket from being a childhood. They feel like they're wrapping their team in a metaphorical condom by drafting a running back early on, because as you get deeper and deeper into the draft, the running backs that I like become more and more scarce. And especially outside of these top 2 rounds, once you get out of the second round, there starts to be legitimately humongous question marks at the running back position. So player number 4 in consensus, like I said, is Austin Ekeler, running back of the LA Chargers. He was the running back number 1 last year in PPR as well as PPR points per game. He played in all 17 games last season, having 204 carries, 12 per game, ranking 20th. 915 rushing yards, 53.8 per game, number 17. 128 targets, 7.5 per game, number 1. 107 receptions, 6.3 per game, also number 1. 722 receiving yards, 42.5 per game, number 2. And he was number 1 in total touchdowns with 18. Austin Ekeler had an insane last season. Could he repeat as the number 1 running back? 100%. I know that the offense is switching their offensive coordinator to Kellen Moore, and I know some people get a little bit nervous when it comes to the conversation about Austin Ekeler because Kellen Moore has not been someone that notoriously draws up all of these great pass-catching opportunities for the running back. It's not like Tony Pollard, who is, in my opinion, a fantastic pass-catching running back. He wasn't drawing up a million pass plays for him, and that's okay. Because I genuinely believe that even if Kellen Moore isn't doing that, which I think he would, because you can make a very clear argument that Austin Ekeler, outside of Justin Herbert, is the most focal point of this Chargers offense. He's better than Allen, better than Mike Williams, better than Quentin Johnston, better than Gerald Everett, right? Austin Ekeler, to me, is the focal point in this LA Chargers offense. So I think that even if Kellen Moore isn't by design designing all these plays for Austin Ekeler, Justin Herbert, the pervert, has it ingrained deep in his mind to dump the ball off a shit ton to Austin Ekeler. Austin Ekeler, another one of those guys, 4.2 true yards per carry, 34th. Again, if you're getting enough carries, it's not really going to matter. And the reason why you draft Ekeler isn't because of the amount of carries he gets. Again, the important part about Ekeler is his targets. He's still the clear number 1 back on his team, but it would be shocking to see this year Austin Ekeler roll out of bed and get 16 carries or something like that per game. I just don't see that as possible. Maybe it does happen, but I don't think that is the most logical way to think about things. I don't think that is the most likely scenario. 5.3 yards per touch, though, 15th. Second in yards created, 4th in yards created per touch, and second in terms of dominator rating. All 4 of these guys that we have discussed right now, even if I have the order a little bit different of these players, they are all incredibly safe. Now, obviously, any fucking player in fantasy football can get injured, right? But Austin Ekeler, Jamar Chase, McCaffrey, Jefferson, these are some of the guys that I feel most confident about. I feel like the first round of fantasy football drafts this year has significantly less holes than prior seasons. It is hard to make a crazy argument. Again, even though I don't have Ekeler ranked as my 4th overall player for fantasy football drafts, it is hard for me to sit here and poke a million holes into the argument of drafting Austin Ekeler 4th overall because of how good of a player he is. Moving to the 5th overall player here, we got Travis Kelce, tight end of the Kansas City Chiefs. Here, we are going to make an argument as to why I don't like Kelce 5th overall, but I do understand why people would draft Travis Kelce 5th overall. But before we can do that, I would like to give you guys a quick word from our friends, our sponsor of today's video, Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is the single best place to play best ball fantasy football this summer. If you don't know what best ball is, it's the best part about fantasy football. It's the draft, and that's it. There's no trades, there's no editing your lineup, and there's no waivers. At the end of every single week, Underdog automatically puts the highest scores into your lineup for you. And the best part about this all is, after the draft, you don't have to worry about it anymore. You can draft your team and then come back towards the end of the season and start following things, or you can follow from a week in, week out standpoint, just like you would with your normal fantasy football league. They have the biggest best ball fantasy football contest ever. $25 to enter, Best Ball Mania 4, 150 max entries, $15 million in total prizes, $3 million to first place. They also have other smaller contests that they will continue to be releasing all over this summer. Some contests will be $3 to enter, $5 to enter, $7 to enter, all tournaments. But they also have kind of a normal fantasy league there with as low of a buy-in as $3. You draft your team, you versus 11 other people with as low of a buy-in as $3, and the person in first and second wins the money, just like a typical fantasy football league's payout structure. So if you guys want to check that out, it sounds interesting to use, make sure you use promo code NOTORIOUS at checkout when you go ahead and try to deposit on there for a first match deposit bonus of up to $100. So you deposit 100, they give an additional 150, an additional 50, 25, an additional 25. Next Sunday, I will be doing a 10 to 12 hour draft-a-thon on Underdog with a bunch of guests. So make sure that if you want to draft with me, you're signed up on there. We'll be doing probably like 10, maybe 11 or 12 drafts on there. So if you pop on in there, you're going to get a chance to potentially draft with me as well as whoever the guest is on the stream at that point. So back to Travis Kelce here. Why do I not like Kelce at the 1.05? To me, it's very simple. There are players still available to pick that I feel a lot more comfortable with in terms of roster construction when compared to Travis Kelce. Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, Bijan Robinson. These are other guys that I would definitely select over Travis Kelce. Now, I get the argument to be made, right? Travis Kelce, week in and week out, you never have to worry about your tight end when you pay the price for Travis Kelce, because every single week, this guy is never going to blow his load in your lineup and score like 3 fantasy points. He's probably going to get 20, maybe he could drop 30 plus fantasy points in any given matchup. And there are not a lot of tight ends in the NFL that can do that. But it is important to note that you are missing out on these running backs that I view as a lot safer. These upper echelon wide receivers in the first round when you pay the pretty penny at 5th overall to draft Kelce. So again, this is not to deter you from drafting Kelce. It's just my opinion on things. I would much rather not draft Kelce at the 5th pick and wait a couple of picks, right? If I was 9th overall and he falls to the 9th overall pick, I'm fine taking him there, but I think 5th overall, at least for me, is a little too expensive for him. I'm going to name his stats off. I'm going to read them off. This guy's the best tight end in the NFL by far and away. I don't need to get on my knees and give this guy the gawk 9,000 for you to all know how great he is, right? Tight end 1 in PPR last year. Tight end 1 in PPR points per game. 17 games played. Number 1 in targets. Number 1 in receptions. Number 1 in receiving yards. And you fucking guessed it. Number 1 in total touchdowns. 4th in dominator rating. 1st in yards per team pass attempt. 2nd in yards per route run. The way the Kansas City Chiefs offense is constructed, sure, they have Sky Moore, they have Kadarius Toney, they have these other pieces in this offense, but at the end of the day, the true number 1 option is not a wide receiver, and his name is Travis Kelce. When you get Kelce, you get so much value. So again, I understand why people will say they are comfortable drafting Kelce at 5th overall, but I would rather wait, hope that he falls to me if I'm at like pick 8 or 9 before I pick him at pick 5. Obviously, if you're in the draft, you really want Kelce or 5th overall, go take him. But for me, I would much rather have a guy like Tyreek or Cooper Kupp or Bijan at this spot. Moving now to the 6th overall pick based upon consensus ADP, we have Cooper Kupp, wide receiver of the LA Rams, wide receiver 23 in PPR last year, but that's because he only played in 9 games. He was the wide receiver 1 in PPR points per game last season. It's important to put an asterisk, though, by Cooper Kupp because he is still dealing with an injury. He is not yet back at practice, and I talk about this a ton, so I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record here, but I talk about this a bunch. Injuries are going to find your fantasy football team. It doesn't matter if you're hiding, you're the number 1 hide-and-seek champion in the United States of America. The injuries are going to find you, and they are going to do dirty things to you, right? It happens basically every single year. Someone on your team is bound to get hurt. Actually, every year, someone on your team is going to get hurt. So I try not to go into the draft chasing these injuries. Now, based upon every single thing that I have read from doctors, Cooper Kupp will be just fine. But it's important to note that if there is some type of a setback, or maybe he's not back closer to the end of August, then maybe you want to throw a little bit of panic in the discourse of Cooper Kupp. Maybe you want to drop him down the rankings a little bit. 9 games played, 98 targets, 10.9 per game, 34th, 75 receptions, 8.3 per game, number 23rd, 812 receiving yards, 90.2 per game, number 33, and 7 total touchdowns, 14th at wide receiver. He was first in dominator rating. The motherfucker only dropped 1 pass last season. He was 18th in target accuracy and 11th in target separation. You can easily make an argument that Cooper Kupp is the best receiver in the NFL. You can also make an argument that we take the injury away, Cooper Kupp should be the number 1 overall pick in fantasy. This guy was bending defenses over all of last season, and it almost feels like people have forgot because you see him get so buried in fantasy football drafts. Sometimes you see him where running backs go a little bit higher, going closer to pick 8 or 9 in drafts, which is just hilarious, right? That is an insane value for Cooper Kupp. Again, to me, this guy might be the best receiver in the NFL, and I agree that he should be close to pick 5, 6, or 7 in fantasy football drafts this season. At number 7, we have a wide receiver that I've ranked ahead of Cooper Kupp right now, and I had it ranked that way even before the injury to Cooper Kupp. Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins, wide receiver 2 in PPR last year, wide receiver 3 in PPR points per game. He played in all 17 games last season, finishing with 170 targets, 10 per game, ranking 3rd, 119 receptions, 7 per game, ranking 2nd, 1,710 receiving yards, just over 100 yards per game, number 2, and 9 total touchdowns. 4th, he was 3rd in route win rate, 6th in yards per target, and 2nd in true catch rate. This is something I've talked about a bunch as well. To unlock the true ceiling, the true number 1 potential of Tyreek Hill, we need Tua Tagovailoa to stay healthy. Now, if you compare Tyreek's numbers with Jalen Waddle's numbers, with and without Tua, Jalen Waddle was hit by a lock in a sock in prison by Tua being out there, and Tyreek was hit with a little bit of a softer blow, right? A pillow fight. It still sucked. He didn't score a single touchdown in games without Tua, which is 5 games. He averaged less targets, less receiving yards, and less touchdowns, but it wasn't as severe when you compare to Jalen Waddle, whose numbers really did kind of fall off the edge of the earth, Christopher Columbus style, when you compare with Tua versus without. But it is, without a doubt in my mind, Tua is the fucking key to the success of this Dolphins offense. I think Mike White's a better backup than Skylar Thompson or Teddy Bridgewater, but obviously you don't want things to go that way. You want Tua healthy all year for Tyreek to get the skeleton key to be the number 1 receiver in fantasy football. The biggest hole I would say you can poke in the argument of Tyreek Hill is that he's getting up there in age. People say that about Travis Kelce as well, but Tyreek just had his best fucking season in the National Football League, going from Pat Mahomes to Tua, so I think he can at least repeat his success of last season. And to me, he is a locked and loaded top 3 wide receiver as long as he and Tua stay healthy. At number 8, we got Saquon Barkley. And this is where I start to really disagree with things. I have Bijan ranked ahead of Saquon. I also have Nick Chubb ranked ahead of Saquon Barkley. I wouldn't be shocked if Saquon beat out Bijan, beat out Nick Chubb, and was maybe just the running back 1 in fantasy football, but I definitely feel pretty strongly in ranking Bijan as well as Chubb ahead of him. Running back 5 last year in PPR, 5 in PPR points per game, played in 16 games last season, 4th in carries, 4th in rushing yards, 6th in targets, 7th in receptions, 14th in receiving touchdowns, and 10th in terms of total touchdowns. The one thing that does kind of suck about Saquon Barkley, which isn't really the case about the other running backs ahead of him, which is Austin Ekeler as well as Christian McCaffrey, is that, assuming that Trey Lance isn't the starting quarterback, is that with Barkley, there's a legitimate chance that they get to the goal line and he doesn't get the ball, right? On the goal line, if you're running the ball for the Chargers, even though Ekeler isn't built like this fucking bulldozer, this rhinoceros, they give him the ball on the goal line. They give McCaffrey the ball on the goal line. I don't know why I just had a fucking aneurysm right there. But with the Giants, Daniel Jones could take it in, which does hurt his touchdown upside. Again, I'm not saying that this smacks Saquon over the head, that it chops him up into pieces, but it does at least make an argument for the other guys that are below him to be ranked ahead of him, as well as the amount of potential volume these other running backs could see in the receiving game. Now, I know people say Nick Chubb doesn't really catch passes, but I think Nick Chubb can catch a similar amount of passes as Saquon Barkley, given the fact that Kareem Hunt is gone. But back to Saquon Barkley, 35th in true yards per carry. Again, I'm not worried about that. He gets so much volume that his efficiency in terms of yards per carry is bound to dip when you get that much volume. Second in breakaway runs, sixth in evaded tackles, and fifth in yards created. While it has almost sounded like I have stabbed Saquon a million times like fucking Julius Caesar style, I want you guys to understand that I still think Saquon Barkley is a great running back. I think Brian Daboll has really switched up the culture in New York, and I think Daniel Jones is much better. This is the best Giants team we have seen in a very long time. But I think there are some other arguments to rank Chubb, Bijan ahead of him, which makes it a little bit gross to draft him at 8th overall. Now, I'm not saying he can't be a first-round pick. Of course he can. But at 8th overall, when guys like Bijan or Diggs are still available, CeeDee Lamb, there's a lot of guys you might want to take ahead of Saquon Barkley, in my opinion, at number 9. And again, this doesn't mean that Saquon Barkley's a bust, a full fade at pick number 8, but I definitely would prefer some other players. Speaking of other players I prefer, Bijan Robinson, number 9 in the consensus ADP, running back of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, I have seen so many people try to be so anti-Bijan Robinson. They will say that Bijan's a rookie. They've never seen it happen in the NFL, right? They've never seen him play in the NFL. He is bound to not be worth a first-round pick. Maybe these people were burned by Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's rookie year, where everyone was banging the drum, aside from me. Or at least I didn't do it at a super heavy pace. I was banging the drum a little bit. I drafted him a couple times in the first round, I will admit. But I wasn't all over the Clyde Edwards-Helaire bandwagon. Obviously, he was drafted in the first round. He went to the fucking Chiefs, right? It makes sense to why you would like him. But Bijan is on a whole nother level. Bijan is a legitimate generational skill set level running back. Some people say he struggled in some games at Texas, but I'm not too worried about that. We all know Texas chokes these big games anyways. That's just what they do. He played for 3 years there, back-to-back seasons with over 1,000 rushing yards. Last year in 12 games, 258 rushing attempts, 1,580 rushing yards, 19 receptions for 314 receiving yards, and 20 total touchdowns. I know some people will see, oh, he only had 19 receptions. Will he catch passes in the NFL? I think so. And that shouldn't really come to a shock to you because Desmond Ridder is such a young quarterback. He's not that good of a quarterback, so I think he's going to want to dump the ball off a ton. I didn't think Bijan would be a polarizing player, but there's tons of people that just don't want to draft him, and I really don't get it. This is an offense that is going to be running the ball at one of the highest clips in the National Football League. Bijan Robinson was a very early first-round pick. Again, the numbers at Texas, the film at Texas will make your eyes ejaculate. It is beautiful what Bijan Robinson was able to do in Texas for the last couple of years. This guy, again, he can barrel through defenders, and he also has the solid wiggle. He's not the most fast guy on earth, but he does at breakaway speed, right? Once he gets past those guys, you ain't catching him. He's going to throw up the fucking Tyreek Hill peace sign. See you later, pal. This is a team, again, they're going to run the ball so much. They made Tyler Algier look like this amazing running back. I don't think Tyler Algier is some schlub, but he dominated because of how much they run the ball. You draft Bijan super high, you're going to use him, you're going to run the ball a lot. To me, there is legitimately no reason to believe that Bijan can't be the number 1 running back in fantasy football. Moving now to pick number 10, Stefon Diggs of the Buffalo Bills. I have Diggs ranked higher than 10. Wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills, wide receiver 4 in PPR last year and wide receiver 5 in PPR points per game. Now, if you've been watching my channel this offseason, you would know that I think the Buffalo Bills might take a bit of a dip from last year compared to this season as a team. But I think Diggs and Josh Allen might get slightly better because if you remember last season, Josh Allen got hurt. He hurt something on his throwing arm, and that greatly fucking affected him. There was some balls thrown at Diggs that looked like they were thrown by Ben DiNucci or something, right? There was definitely a dip in play. Now, it's not like Josh Allen magically turned to shit, but he wasn't the same quarterback that he was prior to that injury. So assuming now Josh Allen is at 100% or as close to 100% as possible, that definitely makes me a lot more confident in Diggs. And again, even with Josh Allen not being 100% all season, probably like 65% towards the end of the season, 17 games played, 5th in targets with 155, 3rd in receptions with 110, 5th in receiving yards with 1,455, and 2nd in total touchdowns. He was 6th in yards per team pass attempt, 17th in yards per target, 9th in fantasy points per target, and 4th in fantasy points per route run. Stefon Diggs is still one of the best receivers in the NFL on one of the best offenses in the National Football League. And I know they brought in Dalton Kincaid, but they didn't really bring in more playmakers like I figured they would, if I'm being honest with you. Gabe Davis kind of swung and missed, so I thought they might look to bring in another receiver, but they don't. So it's just Diggs there as the clear number one. Again, things don't get much safer than a guy like Stefon Diggs, especially if you can get him at like pick 10. There's a lot of drafts I do where he's like the 5th overall pick. So at pick number 10, that definitely feels good for Diggs. Moving to pick number 11, we got CeeDee Lamb, the Lambster, wide receiver of the Dallas Cowboys. He was the wide receiver 5 in PPR last year and the wide receiver 7 in PPR points per game. Important to note that at the beginning of the season, because of Dak's injury, he played a couple of games with Cooper Rush. 17 games played. He was 4th in targets with 156, 9.2 per game, 107 receptions, 6.3 per game, number 4, 1,359 receiving yards, 79.9 per game, number 6, and 9 total touchdowns, 4th at wide receiver. CeeDee Lamb has continued to get better ever since he entered the NFL. He continues to get more targets, more receptions, more receiving yards. He continues to pass the eye test even further than he did every single year before. He was 8th in route win rate last season, 7th in dominator rating, and 8th in juke rate. This is an offense that I expect to be very solid again. Obviously, they switch out their offensive coordinator, losing Kellen Moore, but ultimately, we all know CeeDee Lamb is the number 1 receiver in this offense. I know a lot of people like to shit on Dak Prescott, and I do too, right? When you shit on a player on the Dallas Cowboys, it just feels so fun because the Dallas Cowboys have so many fans, and not all of you guys, if you're a Dallas Cowboys fans, a lot of Dallas Cowboys fans are delusional. They think every single year they're going to the Super Bowl. You might as well tattoo the Lombardi on your arm like that Lions fan did. That's a little bit crazy. A little crazy out of the Lions fans. I like the Lions. A little crazy. I like the Cowboys too. I root for basically every single team. The only teams I don't like are the Jets, the Patriots, and the Bills because they're in the Dolphins division. But when we're talking about fantasy football, as you just heard with Stefon Diggs, right, I call it as it really is, right? So it's fun to make fun of the Cowboys, but ultimately, CeeDee Lamb is still the number 1 guy. They bring in Brandon Cooks, which should take away some cushion from CeeDee Lamb. They also have Michael Gallup as well. CeeDee Lamb's a pretty solid route runner as is. Again, this is a pretty solid offense. Would I take CeeDee Lamb at number 11? Most times, no, but I get the argument to why he would be a first-round pick, right? Some people like him better than guys that I like better, like Davante Adams or Amon-Ra St. Brown. I definitely think it's kind of splitting hairs when you're trying to argue about Lamb versus Amon-Ra St. Brown, whereas I do feel a little bit more strongly that I think Adams is better than Lamb. And speaking of Adams, the Adams family, we got Davante Adams, wide receiver of the Las Vegas Raiders, wide receiver 3 in PPR last year, wide receiver 6 in PPR points per game. So many people dislike Davante Adams. Make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button down below if you are new. Because, oh my God, he's going from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo. Nick, aren't you scared? No, I'm not scared. I made this joke in yesterday's video and I'll make it again. I know Jimmy Garoppolo used up all of his metaphorical real-life skill points on being good-looking. Didn't give as many points into, his arm strength or anything. But Davante Adams literally bent a defense over without the use of lube last year, prison style, with Jarrett Stidham. And you think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be this dagger into the fucking heart of the Night King, Arya Stark style? No. Davante Adams is going to be just fine. Maybe he can't finish number 1 with Jimmy Garoppolo, but he certainly can finish top 5, top 3, and in a lot of drafts that I do, he finishes outside. He's a guy that's being drafted outside the first round. Now, this consensus ADP, again, it's from ESPN, Sleeper, NFL, and RT Sports, all averaged together. So I'm glad at least some of these websites are giving Davante Adams the respect that I've given him, but it seems like in some of your guys' drafts, he will be a second-round pick, and to me, that's just hilarious. Like, you're giving me a guy you could argue is the best receiver in the NFL in the second round. Or the very end of the first round, at least. 17 games played last year, 2nd in targets, 7th in receptions, 180 targets, 100 receptions, 1,516 receiving yards, 3rd first in total touchdowns with 14th. Doing this all with the 69th highest target accuracy. Very nice. I like Borat likes it because the number 69 is funny, but I don't like that, right? That's not the best. But again, do you really think it's going to plummet to like 150th with Jimmy Garoppolo? The obvious answer to that question would be, fuck no, baby. Of course it's not. 43.2% dominator rating, second. 5th in total route wins. Don't overthink Davante Adams. Do not try to galaxy brain yourself away from a guy with the skill set of Adams. I have seen so many people talk so negatively about Davante Adams. Another guy, oh my God, he's getting old. Jimmy Garoppolo this, Jimmy Garoppolo that. Well, shove a sock in it. Shove a sock in your mouth, pal. Davante Adams is coming this season. He's coming hard. Pause. Now we move to my first round, so we're just going to rattle the names off. And again, just kind of talk about the differences between the consensus ADP and my rankings. I did somewhat talk about it when I was rattling off the consensus ADP. So my first round, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase are the top 2. Number 3 is Christian McCaffrey. Again, if you want to take McCaffrey number 1 overall, I'm not going to argue with you. If you want to take him ahead of Jamar Chase, not arguing with you about that either. Again, the injury to Joe Burrow somewhat concerns me. It's not time to flip the panic button, but it's time to, if the panic button has a box that you open up, you know, like in those movies where they like set the fucking nuke off. I didn't watch Oppenheimer, but I assume there's like a little, like you flick the button up, you know, the glass thing around it, and then you can hit the button. You know, I just flicked that little glass thing open, you know, a little bit nervous. Then we got Tyreek and Cooper Kupp. Again, if Cooper Kupp was 100% healthy, you can definitely argue for Cooper Kupp ahead of Tyreek Hill. And number 6, we have Austin Ekeler, running back of the LA Chargers. I have been on Austin Ekeler all offseason. Everyone has. I don't really know anyone that's fading Austin Ekeler. You could argue for Bijan ahead of him, but there is just some safety with, you just know who Austin Ekeler is. Like, there's that 0.00001% chance that Bijan's just an NFL bust. Like, you already know how good Austin Ekeler is. At number 7, we got Stefon Diggs, wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills. Again, an incredibly safe option in the middle of the first round. I was pretty shocked that the consensus has Diggs all the way down at 10. At number 8, we have Bijan Robinson, running back of the Atlanta Falcons. This is the point where if I really wanted Kelce, and I'm talking about I like Kelce more than Bijan, I could talk myself into Kelce over Bijan at 8, but I'm probably not taking Kelce there. Like, once Bijan's gone, that's where I start to feel like, hey, you know what? Now I'm more warmed up to the idea of my first round pick being a tight end. I'm a lot more open to that at pick 9. And then the further you get into the first round, right? Pick 10, Davante Adams. Pick 11, Nick Chubb, 9-inch Nicholas Chubb. Pick 12, Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? The deeper you get into the first round, the more my brain is able to talk itself, to soothe itself with the thought of drafting Travis Kelce. So Adams at 10. Again, I really do think Adams could be a top 3 receiver in fantasy football. I'm not afraid at all of Jimmy Garoppolo. I think Nick Chubb's going to outscore Saquon Barkley because I think he might get the most carries in the National Football League, and I think he might see a Saquon number of receptions, targets, things like that of Saquon in the past, and that would elevate Nick Chubb over Saquon. And I think the Browns offense is a big bounce back candidate. And then I have Amon-Ra ranked ahead of CeeDee and AJ Brown. Again, if you want to argue for Lamb or Saquon or AJ Brown at pick 12, I wouldn't really hate you for arguing that. I really just like Amon-Ra St. Brown a ton because I'm a huge fan of this Lions offense this year, and I view this offense as a team that's going to want to throw the ball a bunch to Amon-Ra. I think he could average, without Jameson Williams for the first 6 games, fucking 12 or 13, 14 maybe targets per game. And at the end of the season, that's going to just elevate him past a guy potentially like Lamb or A.J. Brown. And with A.J. Brown, it's clear that they have a number 2 behind him that's really good at Devontae Smith. With Amon-Ra St. Brown, sure, they have other pieces on the team, but there's really no argument that any of those guys are better than Amon-Ra, at least as of right now, the Sun Gods. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Again, if you did end up enjoying, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below as well as hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. Make sure you guys check out Underdog Fantasy. Again, we are going to be doing a 10 to 12 hour draft extravaganza, not this Sunday, next Sunday. Bunch of guests. Leave in the comment section if you guys got a guest that you want to see on there. I've already reached out to a couple of people. I've talked to just guys that are my friends right now, and then I might start reaching out to people that I don't talk to as much. maybe they'll want to hop on to this extravagant event. Hope you guys did enjoy today's video. Again, promo code Notorious. First match deposit bonus on Underdog Fantasy. First match up to $100. Deposit 100 again. Additional 150. Additional 50. 25. And additional 25. I love you guys all so much. Rankings will be out soon. As always,